and welcome to Total Football Talk. I'm Anthony.
I'm Eric, and sorry, Anthony, but I got a mini rant. I know you went on one earlier, and it's my turn. So really quick, I just want to say that the judge threw out a redo of the Saints-Rams game. I'm very happy. The talk still in Chicago is that the Rams don't belong in the Super Bowl, but guess what? There's not an alternate universe. The Rams are in the Super Bowl. Deal with it. The Saints, go home, go to bed, relax, wake up, rest your bodies for next year because you're not in the Super Bowl. Get over it, stop crying. And if you're going to blame anybody, blame Sean Payton, and I already told you why.
Yeah.
There, I'm done.
I love it, Eric. I love it. And did you see the news that Deshaun Jackson wants in L.A.?
I did see that, and I'm sorry to say, but he would be a cancer on your
Oh,
team.
no. I don't want him. But let the wanting to come to be on the Rams begin. That's
Well, yeah, he wants to win. He's done with Tampa Bay, and I don't think he's buying into anything that Bruce Arians is selling. And, Deshaun Jackson has no leverage, and who knows if the Rams would actually have the money for him or even a spot on the team for him.
Yeah, I hear you. We'll get into that when we cover the breakdown. Okay, so what me and Eric are going to do first, I'm really excited to do this show. It's the top 10 Super Bowls of all time. Now, I have omitted every one of the first 3 Super Bowls of the New England Patriots dynasty because we know they cheated. It's obvious they cheated. They admitted they cheated, and the league punished them for cheating. So for me, knowing those Super Bowls are tainted, I'm not putting them on the list. I'm not putting them on any list.
Well, that's great because they aren't even on my top 10 list.
See, there we go, buddy. Great minds think alike. All right, top 10 Super Bowls of all time. If we're going to start, I'll go first, and then Eric's going to go second. So my number 10 is Super Bowl V. It's the first Super Bowl to ever come down to essentially one of the last plays of the game. It was the Colts kicked a field goal, didn't leave Dallas a lot of time to win the game. I know this game was sloppy, but it was really, two teams that had been through a lot of crap. The Colts had lost the title in '64 to the Cleveland Browns in shocking fashion. They lost Super Bowl III to the Jets in shocking fashion. And the Dallas Cowboys, if it wasn't, actually, let me get back real quick with the Colts too. Not only was that a shocking loss, but it was devastating because it legitimized the AFL and forced the Colts, or it forced the NFL to acknowledge that the AFL had teams that could compete with them. And 1 year later, they would agree on a merger. Now, that being said, Dallas, you talk about heartbreak, 66 and 67, they were on the doorsteps of Super Bowl I and II against that great Packer dynasty and brought them to the brink each time and fell short. So this Super Bowl really came down to 2 Cinderellas, and somebody's bridesmaid was finally getting married. And in this case, the Dallas Cowboys snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat on a double tip pass for a John Mackey touchdown early in the game. Mike Curtis was a devastating beast at middle linebacker all day long against the Dallas Cowboys. And not only did the Colts win it with a field goal at the end, but Chuck Howley to this day is the only MVP of a Super Bowl on a losing team. So not even a member of the Colts won the MVP of the Super Bowl. It went to the losing team and Dallas Cowboys Chuck Howley, which is, in itself interesting. But this was really a battle of 2 titans, 2 former NFL franchises going at it in 1970, and the Colts just proved to be too much. Eric, your turn.
All right, my 10th game is actually a tie between 2, and I love defense in Super Bowls, and these 2 teams really put on a Super Bowl showing. Super Bowl 20, Bears versus Patriots, and I'm only going to read you their defensive stats. We already know the outcome of the game. But the Bears had 7 sacks, 6 turnovers, a pick 6, and a safety in the end zone. The safety in the end zone actually was their last points of the game. They gave up 123 total yards. Richard Dent, their defensive end, was MVP. He ran away with it. You could have possibly even, think about giving it to McMahon. He didn't throw for any touchdowns, but he did run for 2 touchdowns. But it went to Dent, and rightfully so. He had a monster game. And then the other team that was tied with them, Ravens versus Giants. I mean, if you remember what the Giants did to the Vikings in the NFC Championship game, I think it was like 41-0 or 41-7, somewhere around there. The Ravens beat the crap out of the Giants in this game, and they had 4 sacks, 5 turnovers, 152 total yards given up. There was a pick six. They actually did trade kickoff returns for touchdowns in the game, if I remember correctly. I'm going to go look that up really quick, just so I'm not talking out of my butt. Let's see, the Giants got their touchdown. Yeah, Ron Dixon, 97-yard kickoff return. Then they kicked off, and Jermaine Lewis had an 84-yard kickoff return for touchdown, basically negating what the Giants did. And Ray Lewis was your MVP. 2 great defensive games that stood out. And, you know, the Ravens' offense wasn't all that, but they rode their defense. The Bears actually had an above-average offense that year. And, you know, when you have Walter Payton running the rock, he didn't get in the end zone in the Super Bowl, but, you know, the Bears won the Super Bowl. That's all that matters.
My number 9 Super Bowl of all time is Super Bowl 10. The Pittsburgh Steelers against the Dallas Cowboys. This was a great game between 2 great franchises. Pittsburgh had already won Super Bowl 9. Dallas had already won Super Bowl 6. Dallas had been to Super Bowl 5, so this was their second, really their third Super Bowl, I'm sorry. And this was Pittsburgh's second. What I find fascinating about this game is Dallas had all the momentum and a 14-10 lead when Roy Gerela, the kicker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, missed a field goal. And Cliff Harris of the Dallas Cowboys pat him on the helmet and on the back, congratulating him for missing the kick. And Jack Lambert of the Pittsburgh Steelers took Cliff Harris and threw him down to the ground and got in his face, and a scuffle broke out. After that moment, Dallas could only muster a field. No, I'm sorry, it was 10-7. After that moment, Dallas could only muster 10 points in the remaining 3 quarters of the football game, and Pittsburgh ended up scoring, 11 more points. So it wasn't that they blew them away on the scoreboard, but the yardage really did flip. And Pittsburgh, it got 7 points in a really weird way. They kicked 3 field goals and a safety. Or 4 field goals and a safety. That's how they got 14 points. So, they're down 10-7, and they get 14 points with 4 field goals and a safety. And it's crazy. But ultimately, that was enough to turn the tide. Dallas ended up kicking an onside, or I think they kicked an onside at the end of the game, recovered the ball, and had an opportunity to win it on the final play of the game. It was picked off at the goal line, and the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to salt the game away in what was a great game between 2 really good franchises. I have that low on the list because as good of a game as it was a pretty sloppy game, and there was a lot of great defense, which I know you appreciate, Eric, as you just said with your top 10 Super Bowls, and I do too. I really appreciate good defense. But there was a lot of mistakes being made by the offense, missing wide open receivers, guys dropping the ball, missed kicks. There was a lot going on in this Super Bowl, and at the end of the day, the interception by Roger Staubach was understandable because he had no other option. They had 1 play left, and they were going to the end zone with it, but it was just so poorly thrown that none of his guys really had a chance, and the game ended. So my number 9, Super Bowl 10, Steelers 21, Cowboys 17. E, take it away.
What's funny is that my number 9 is Dallas to Pittsburgh as well, but it happened 20 years later, Super Bowl 30.
Nice.
And Neil O'Donnell to Larry Brown was a great connection. The only problem is that Larry Brown played defense for the Eagles.
Someone should have told Neil O'Donnell that.
I mean, I've never seen passes telegraphed better than what Neil O'Donnell did.
Yeah.
Larry Brown had 2 picks, 77 yards in returns, was the MVP. And yeah, Dallas took him to the woodshed. I mean, the game was a lot closer than what the final score, or the game was
not as close.
The game was not as close as the final score indicated. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh scored 10 points in the 4th quarter. They ended up scoring the first 10 points in the fourth quarter. And then Emmitt Smith had a 4-yard rush to really ice the game away and, put Pittsburgh out of reach. And for any Arizona State Sun Devil fans out there, that was the last Super Bowl played in Tempe at Sun Devil Stadium before they moved to the stadium in Glendale. But it was just a great showing by Brown, and Dallas really played a great game. It's just Neil O'Donnell just decided to throw to more people on Dallas than on Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep up with this Pittsburgh theme because number 8 for me is Super Bowl 43. 10 years ago, the Pittsburgh Steelers played the Arizona Cardinals in what I thought up until I won't give that away, but what I think it's tough. It certainly felt like it was one of the better Super Bowls in the modern era that we've ever seen. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers had a lead at halftime. We all remember how they got the lead at halftime. Eric, do you want to remind people?
James Harrison, 100-yard interception return at the goal line as the Cardinals are looking to score and go up. And if they would have scored, that might have been the game over for Pittsburgh.
As the game unfolds, right? I mean, here's the bottom line, too. They're at the 1-yard line. They have a timeout, and it's second down. So even if they get stopped, even if they don't have a timeout for whatever reason, they have enough time to spike the ball, kick the field goal. You take 4 points.
Maybe, I'll tell you what. Maybe they should have handed off to Marshawn. Oh, wait.
Oh, different situation. Yeah, I know. But what was amazing is this was the Larry Fitzgerald show in the fourth quarter, right? Larry Fitzgerald had those 2 amazing touchdowns in the second half. The Cardinals took the lead. They led 23-20. Ben Roethlisberger marches them up the field in an incredible situation, unthinkable situation. Throws a ball that was, should have been picked on that drive. How many times do we see that? And then ends up hitting Santonio Holmes in the end zone for the game winner. And a lot of Cardinal fans say he didn't get that second foot down, but he got that second foot down. Barely, but back, it doesn't matter if it's a toenail or a full foot, right? So at the end of the day, Cardinals lost a heartbreaking game. And a lot of people forget the big plays in that Super Bowl. You mentioned the Harrison touchdown, but let's not forget about the big completion to Santonio Holmes on that drive that set up the touchdown earlier. So just a great Super Bowl, well played, but in the end, Pittsburgh came out on top, much to my chagrin.
Not to discredit anything for the Cardinals, but remember they were a 9-7 regular season team that got into the playoffs, and they went all the way to the Super Bowl. Kurt Warner and Fitzgerald and Bolden and whatnot, and I loved watching Warner and Fitzgerald and Bolden. It was a great trio. A lot of reminders with Warner, Bruce, and Holt. And I mean, you can also throw Raheem in there, but Warner's had some really good wide receiver weapons throughout his career, and they came up short, just 35 seconds short.
I know, crazy game. All right, what's your number 8?
All right, my number 8 happens 2 years after yours, and this was this soon-to-be Hall of Fame quarterback's first Super Bowl appearance, and the quarterback in question on this one was coming off his second when he was only 2 years into the league at his first Super Bowl, and this one happened to be Super Bowl 45, so he had been a 8-year vet already. But my 8th Super Bowl of all time is Super Bowl 45, Green Bay versus Pittsburgh. I didn't like the outcome of this game for reasons, of course, everybody should know. But I will tell you that it lived up to the hype. The Steelers started out shaky. The Packers took lead after lead after lead, and they wouldn't let Pittsburgh get the lead or get back control or tie the game. I hear on ESPN 1000 out here in Chicago, it was on the Mike and Mike show, happened on the Golic and Wingo show, that Ryan Clark would come on all the time and talk about how he was about a 7-year away from intercepting Aaron Rodgers. And he said he went into the Super Bowl saying, I'm going to get a pick, I'm going to get a pick, I'm going to get a pick. And he was so close, but yet, football, like baseball, is a game of inches. And Rodgers was able to just throw it right over the outstretched arm of Ryan Clark for a touchdown to Jordy Nelson. And, I just remember Ryan Clark talking about that all the time. But, it was a great Super Bowl. I mean, Actually, for right now, it's Rodgers' only Super Bowl appearance, which at 35 years old, he's not getting any younger. So, he delivered when he was there, and, it was a great game overall.
Yeah. Well, I remember that Super Bowl. It was just kind of a battle of two NFL titans going at it. So kind of cool to see that if you weren't a fan of either team. Super Bowl number 7 for me was before my time as well. I was probably baking in the oven at the time of the Super Bowl. Maybe. No. January of 79. Yeah, I was baking. I was almost ready to come out. I was. This was January of 1979, Super Bowl 13, in my opinion. This is a Super Bowl that even if there are other great Super Bowls, I may move some down, but I will not move this Super Bowl out, I think, ever. And it's great because I have a lot of Super Bowls on video and DVD, and I'm able to go back and watch these games, the live broadcast as they were being played, which I really encourage fans to do because you really get an appreciation of the ebb and flows of those games when you're able to do that. And you kind of get lost in the moment, and you're able to kind of put yourself in a time portal and travel back in time as if you were watching it live. There's no better experience. And Eric, I'm telling you, this Super Bowl had it all. You had the team of the 70s was at stake, okay? You had Pittsburgh that had already won 3 Super Bowls. Dallas had already won 2 and been to 5, okay? They were there in 70. They won in 71. They were there in 75. They were there in 77, and they were back in 78. So they had been to 5 Super Bowls. Pittsburgh had been to 3. Dallas had already won 2, so if they won this one, it would have been 3 in 5. There was just so much going on between, and these were the two. There's no question. I'm a Rams fan. I mean, it pains me to say it, but Dallas was the best NFC team of the decade, and they were going against the best AFC team of the decade. And it was a rematch to boot. You had Hall of Famers just everywhere on the football field. Offense, defense, they were everywhere. Even special teams. Matt Barr was a young kicker for the Pittsburgh Steelers that year. It's just dotted everywhere. And, not only do you have Roger Staubach versus, Terry Bradshaw, but you've got Drew Pearson, lining up against Mel Blount. You've got, Lynn Swann and John Stallworth against that Cowboy secondary. You got Randy the Monster White in the middle. You've got Mean Joe Green. And the game went back and forth until Jackie Harris dropped the ball in the end zone with the most famous Super Bowl line of all time. Oh, Jackie Robinson dropped it. He's got to be the sickest man in America. And he probably was, because Pittsburgh goes racing out to a 35-17 lead after that. Because Dallas kicked the field goal, after they didn't get the touchdown, so that made it 21-17 instead of 21-21. And then Pittsburgh scored on the next drive. Dallas was still thinking about the drop touchdown, and Pittsburgh stuffed them and then scored again on another touchdown to go up 35-17. But here comes Roger Staubach. A touchdown, another touchdown, an onside kick that gets recovered by Rocky Bleier, and that's how the game ends. It was a great Super Bowl, and there was defensive touchdowns, there were offensive touchdowns, there was just great, great plays, and it comes down to an onside kick between those two great franchises. I hate both of those teams with just about every ounce of my passion. I mean, there's a couple franchises I don't like more, but man, that was a whale of a game, and I honestly think it's one of the greatest of all time, and I don't know how anyone can argue that, but Super Bowl 13 is my number 7. Take it away, E.
Yeah, you forget a lot that was, Pittsburgh 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. Cowboys were 2 Super Bowls, but hey, at least they weren't the Vikings who were only 4.
Yeah, right.
Anyways, my number 6 Super Bowl of all time is Super Bowl 23, and it was 49ers versus Bengals Part 2. We all remember that game for being the catch by John Taylor late in the fourth quarter. But what really turned the tide in this game was defensive lineman Tim Crumry, who broke his leg, allowing San Francisco to actually control more of the clock and run the ball. It was just vintage Joe Montana being cool and leading his team down because they had to go, I want to say, 80 or more yards for that game-winning drive. And the story I've heard in this game was, even though the game was played in Detroit, Joe Montana's in the huddle. He's like, hey,
No, Eric. This game was not in Detroit. It was in Miami. The first one was in Detroit. Super Bowl 23 was in Miami.
Oh, yeah, my bad. Mm-hmm. So Montana is in the huddle, and he's like, hey, you guys see celebrity over there. I want to say it was John Candy.
It was John Candy.
Yeah, John Candy. And everybody's like, what? And that's how they knew they were going to win, because he was so calm, cool, and collected that he kept everything so loose in the huddle. And he's like, all right, let's go win this game.
I love that story, Eric. It's so funny because this is my number 6 Super Bowl. Super Bowl 23, 49ers 20, Bengals 16. I love this game. I love that you told that story because that really shows you just how calm Joe Montana was in the Super Bowl, and especially a Super Bowl of that magnitude. This was not a game that the 49ers thought they had wrapped up. The Bengals were the better team record-wise. They were the better team overall that year, period, I would argue. Fun fact, too, the 49ers lost their starting left tackle with a broken leg in that same game. So, really, they both lost key cogs to their offense. And, Randy White had a really bad snap in his final game that led to a missed field goal. The Bengals had a 16-13 lead. They had all the momentum, and it was just that moment. What I'll remember about this Super Bowl more than anything was this was the first Super Bowl me and my dad were watching together the entire game. I remember 21. I remember watching Super Bowl 21, but I was in and out. My dad was glued because it was his team. I remember Super Bowl 22. I watched. The second quarter was over, and there was no reason to watch anymore. But this Super Bowl, and ironically, I was rooting for the Niners. Don't ask me why. Maybe I wanted to keep it in the NFC West. I don't know. But I was rooting for the Niners in this game. And I remember me and my dad just being glued to the TV and watching this drive. And I remember Lewis Billups had an interception right in his hands, and he dropped it. And I remember my dad saying, Niners are going to score on the next play, and they did. Now, I don't know if that was a touchdown to Rice or if that was the final touchdown at the end of the game, but to John Taylor, but it was such a great game. And it's one of those Super Bowls, you don't drive up the field with 3 minutes and change to go in a football game and score with 58 seconds left on the clock and win the Super Bowl in that fashion, especially considering what Joe Montana had already done in his career, going all the way back to 1980 and, of course, 1981. It was and what he had done to the Bengals the year before. A lot of people forget that. One play left is all he had against the Bengals in 87, and he throws a touchdown pass to Jerry Rice in week 2. That was more of a Sammy Weiss boneheaded situation, but what a great Super Bowl. What a great game, and you really didn't know who was going to win. I mean, the Bengals were favored, but the Niners...
Go ahead and finish your thought.
That's it. Just the Niners.
I was going to say the Niners and Bengals were the only two matchups in the whole decade of the 80s to be under 10 points as far as margin of victory.
Oh, wow. You're right.
4 points in 1989, the 20-16 win, and then 5 points, 26-21 in 1982.
God, you're right, because 27-10, 27-17.
They were pretty much all blowouts in the 80s.
Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? All right, Eric, what's your number 6?
My number 6. Sorry, the 49ers Bengals was number 7. I miscounted. Number 6 was Super Bowl 42, and that was the Patriots and Giants. And that was, could New England complete the perfect season and go 19-0? Well, the Giants played the Patriots tough in the first matchup, and I know Brady had a really good strikeout to Randy Moss in that game. I mean, Moss was still Moss, and still being able to run down the sideline, making same catches and run into the end zone, still talented as ever. And that was Tom Brady's MVP season, where he threw 50 touchdown passes.
Yeah.
But the Giants played them tough in the regular season. They rotated out their 4 defensive linemen in and out all game to create pressure on Brady. They weren't able to pull off a victory in New England, but in the Super Bowl, when it counted the most, the Giants were able to pull off a stunning upset and beat the Patriots.
Yeah, that was a great game. I have we may revisit that game shortly. For me, number 5 is next. My number 5 Super Bowl of all time. You just did your number 6. I'm doing my number 5. Super Bowl 49. Patriots 28. Seahawks 24. A lot of people, myself included, thought, okay, New England's going to lose again on another fluke catch. Yeah, the David Tyree catch in the game you were just talking about. Yeah, the Mario Manningham catch on the sideline in the next time the Patriots were in the Super Bowl. And then in this game, you had this ridiculous ball that drops in the arms of a Seahawk wide receiver. I don't even remember the guy's name because he only had one good game his entire career, and that Super Bowl was it. But this is infamously known as the Marshawn Lynch game, right? I mean, you have the ball at the 1-yard line. Marshawn Lynch has been the best running back in the National Football League, and it's not even close all year long. New England knows they can't stop him. They know he's going to run the football. They have one timeout. It's 2nd and goal. Everything's set up for them to try 2 plugs into the line, call their final tee, and then draw something up on 4th down if they don't score. But what do? They throw it. Malcolm Butler picks it, and the game is over. And I'll never forget that a lot of people right away started speculating that Marshawn Lynch's contract was up. So he was due for a big payout. And the last thing that Paul Allen and the Seattle Seahawks wanted to do was pay him a huge paycheck to keep him. I don't know if that's true. That's a pretty dumb reason to not run your best player to win a championship. You not only cost yourself as a coach and an owner, but you cost your team and you cost your brand. I can't imagine that's what went down in the thought process. But whatever the thought process was, dumbest play in NFL history. But a great game.
The wide receiver you're thinking about is Chris Matthews.
Yeah, that's the one.
And here's the funny thing. Doug Baldwin was in his 4th season. 1 catch, 3 yards.
Wow. That's crazy.
Okay, so my number 5 Super Bowl of all time, Super Bowl 7, 1972, Dolphins versus Redskins. And I put this above the Patriots and Giants because the Dolphins were also going for a perfect season. And the Dolphins were able to deliver. They ended up beating the Redskins 14-7. I mean, can't talk about much offense when you're playing a lot of defense in that game. But, Don Shula was able to pop the champagne, and the Dolphins have been popping the champagne ever since.
Yeah, it was a great Super Bowl. I mean, great Super Bowl as far as 2 great teams. I mean, the Redskins proved they belong there. And Miami proved that they were the best team. It was a fun game. All right, number 4 for me. Number 4 is near and dear to my heart. You probably already know where I'm going with this one. Number 4 for me on the all-time Super Bowl list is Super Bowl 34, Rams 23, Titans 16. Now, there's a lot of things I can say about this Super Bowl. Let me just get the elephant out of the room first. The number 1 reason this is not higher for me is that the Rams had missed a field goal. I think they missed 2 field goals. They could only kick field goals in the first half. They only led 16-0, and that's when really the game got exciting. But there was like 4 missed kicks in this game, 2 on each side. Now the Rams did block a kick by the Tennessee Titans early in the second half. But at the end of the day, once the Rams got that touchdown drive and they went up 16-0, the Titans turned it around and they started running the ball, and Eddie George started running. And Aaron McNair started running and throwing, and that freight train was just going, and there was no stopping it. I remember the touchdown pass was so iconic because the Rams had won a Super Bowl not a Super Bowl, but they won an NFL championship in 1951 against the Cleveland Browns. In a 17-17 tie, Norm Van Brocklin dropped back, or it might have been Bob Waterfield, it was one of the two, but I think it was Norm Van Brocklin, dropped back and threw a 73-yard touchdown pass to Tom Fierce to go up 24-17. In this Super Bowl, tied 16-16, Kurt Warner dropped back and threw a 73-yard touchdown pass to Isaac Bruce to take the lead that they wouldn't lose, and they ended up winning 23-16. So there was a lot of similarities between the 51 title year and this title year, just like there's a lot of similarities between this Super Bowl team and the 99 Super Bowl team. I think that's kind of interesting, but I digress. It was so, for me, it came down to how complete the Rams were. In this game, they had a blocked field goal. They had a couple of key field goals that they did make. They had great offense. They had over 400 yards. Defensively, they had shut the Titans out for the first half. But the final play of the game, they had to play perfect defense in order to hold them out of the end zone, and they did. Great game. Rams win. NFL champion. Super Bowl champion, our first of hopefully many. 23-16 over Tennessee. Super Bowl 34 is my number 4. E, what's your number 4?
All right, my number 4 is Super Bowl 29. It was an all-California Super Bowl. I just want to apologize to Evan Forever right now when I talk about this game. I'm sorry. Again,
this is not funny, Eric.
Me as being a Bears fan, and truly, with a passion, hating the 49ers as much as I hate the Packers and the Cowboys, because the 49ers literally and figuratively beat the living crap out of the Bears on their way to the Super Bowl for Super Bowl 29, which happened in what was the 1994 season.
Yep.
The Bears pulled off a miraculous win in Minnesota, and then they forgot to show up the next week. But this was San Francisco's first Super Bowl without Montana at the helm, and a lot of people were like, okay, well, you still got Jerry Rice, and I'm sorry, but I did like the 49ers uniforms that year. I thought they were awesome, actually. I just didn't like the team. How would Steve Young do when Steve Young went out and he proved everybody wrong, and everybody knew Steve Young was still a great quarterback, though, but it was a Super Bowl, and he hadn't been there before as a starter and whatnot. So, lo and behold, the Chargers, much like the Bears, didn't really show up much, and I was rooting for the Chargers. I wanted to see, Seau just wreak havoc on defense, but it was the 49ers were way too much firepower for the Chargers in Super Bowl 29, and it was still a great game to watch. I'm just still in awe. That was still probably one of the best offenses I've seen in a Super Bowl.
I can't argue. They were up 21-0 before the frickin' cheerleaders had officially finished their first cheer. It was ridiculous. Natron Means was unbelievable that year too, and they just completely shut him down. I remember that Super Bowl well. All right, for me, my number 3 Super Bowl of all time. Jumping to number 3. Giants 17, Patriots 14. You already touched on the Super Bowl 42. One of the best Super Bowls of all time. This was truly Goliath versus David. And David was expected, much like in the Bible, to be absolutely destroyed and laughed at. What I remember most about this is I was talking to a lot of my friends who were football enthusiasts, even Yui, and I was the only one picking the Giants. And it irritated one of my friends so much, he's like, bet me then. So I bet him $100 that the Giants would win the Super Bowl. And he came over to watch it, and that $100 bill sat on my coffee table for the entire game. Okay? And you dang right, I took that $100 from him when I won. But he's like, how did you know? And it was just, the Giants were built not to beat the Cowboys, although they did on their way to the Super Bowl. They weren't built to win the NFC West, or NFC East, sorry. They were built to beat the Patriots. They really were. The way they had their front four structured, Eli Manning is always been an underrated quarterback throughout his NFL career. And I really, not only is Eli 2-0 all-time in the postseason against Tom Brady, but he ended his 18-0 streak. To me, everyone talks about the David Tyree catch, and I get it. It's a great catch. But what Eli Manning did to get that ball off was unthinkable. And then the ball that he threw, I mean, the prettiest pass you ever saw. Just up and over and right into Plexico Burress' hands for the game-winning touchdown. That was such a beautiful thing to watch, Eric. I don't want to spend too much time on the Super Bowl because you already covered it. But this Super Bowl, it had all of it. It had everything you could want in a Super Bowl. And the underdog wins. Incredibly, the underdog won. Great Super Bowl. Your turn.
That was a really good Super Bowl. I'm sure we could talk about that Super Bowl for hours.
Oh, you know it.
My number 3 Super Bowl is actually another combo of 2 Super Bowls. It actually is a combination of Super Bowl 37 and 47. And those Super Bowls were Tampa Bay versus Oakland and Baltimore versus the 49ers. And I put these on here because I think it's worth mentioning that it is the last 2 Super Bowls actually since 2002, when the Patriots started going to Super Bowls, what seems like on a yearly basis, that there was no Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, or Ben Roethlisberger in either of these 2 Super Bowls. You had Rich Gannon in the AFC, and you had Joe Flacco in the AFC for the Ravens. And it was just nice. It's just different. It was somebody new. This is why a lot of people wanted to watch. And I'm not saying the NFC teams were garbage either, because Tampa Bay legitimately beat the crap out of the Raiders that game. I remember, that was Chucky being dealt to Tampa Bay, saying, "Oh, hey, by the way, we're going to beat you too in the Super Bowl." And then there was the blackout in the Superdome between the Ravens and the 49ers. So there were a lot of storylines between the two, but I think the biggest one is that there weren't those 3 quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, which really made it worth watching.
You want to know something funny, Eric?
What's that?
The Buccaneers and Raiders. That was the last Super Bowl I got wrong.
Yeah, we both got that one wrong, actually, because I remember talking on the phone, about it. We're like, yeah, we want the Raiders to win. Yeah, we forgot that defenses actually played in the Super Bowl.
Dude, I'm telling you, though. But you think about that. Right, I know. But you think about that, dude. That's 2002, and I don't know. I'm pretty sure we've agreed on most, but I haven't gotten a single one wrong since.
I might have gotten Super Bowl 41 wrong, only because as a diehard
Bears fan,
seeing what transpired in that game, I gotta go with my team, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you're right though. It is weird, and as far as the blackout goes, dude, I'm convinced to this day they pulled the plug because they saw the Ravens getting ready to pull away. And that was the same year Alabama had blown out Notre Dame in the BCS championship game. And the last thing the NFL wanted was a blowout. Now, they would get one a couple years later, or the next year, if I remember correctly. But that game is marred in controversy for me. But it was still a close Super Bowl. But, yeah, that's interesting that those are the only 2 Super Bowls since 2000 that had somebody other than Tom Brady or – that's crazy. Since 2001.
Yeah, since the 2001 season, but starting with the Super Bowl in 2002.
Yeah, that's insane. All right, number 2 for me all time. I don't know how this one. First of all, it took a lot for this one to be knocked down from number 1 because this was my number 1 Super Bowl forever. This Super Bowl for me really breaks down into 3 categories. You had the 2 best teams playing each other in the Super Bowl, which didn't happen very often. And I know, I'm talking about Super Bowl 25, Giants 20, Bills 19. I know the 49ers had a better record than the Giants. But if you were alive that year and you were watching football, you knew the Giants were the better team all year long. Now, when Sims gets injured in week 15 or 16 against Buffalo, and he's out for the season, that really put a damper on the whole 2 best teams going at it. But this Super Bowl, man, the Bills had a 12-3 lead. They were on the verge of blowing out the New York Giants, and then New York drove up the field in one of the longest drives in Super Bowl history and scored a touchdown. And then in the second half, had the longest drive in Super Bowl history and scored a touchdown. And that was the Stephen Baker 3rd and 15 drive. And at that point, you know, it was 17-12 and the Bills finally got the football, but there was like 6 minutes to go in the third quarter. And the last time they had touched the ball was with like 11 minutes to go in the second quarter. It was crazy how the Giants dominated that game clockwise. And of course, you know, the Bills still marched into field goal range, a 47-yard field goal, and we're telling a very different story, although it's still probably number 2. But for me, this Super Bowl was everything. It wasn't just the two best teams going at it. That was one element. You had, you know, the country was really in a state of a sensitive state with the Iraqi war. And again, I know this sounds insignificant, but the third element to this is the greatest national anthem performance in sports history. It may be just period in general. Whitney Houston not only knocked it out of the park, but just it's forever going to be known as the anthem. She killed it, and it was great to see.
Yeah, that anthem is still talked about to this day, and I think that a lot of anthems are really just put up against her, saying, "Hey, was it as good?" It's way up on top, and everybody else is way far below, fighting for that number 2 spot. You know. But yeah, I definitely agree. My number 2 Super Bowl of all time, and I'm saying this game, I could have put my number 10s higher, but this was a defensive showing like no other. This team just rolled out to a 36-0 lead. The opposing team didn't score their first points until no time was left on the clock in the third quarter. This team scored right before halftime and took the opening kickoff in the third quarter for a touchdown. I mean, they were rolling on all cylinders. Mm-hmm. And they probably could have put in their second string midway through the first quarter. Both offense and defense, let me tell you. But Super Bowl 48, Seahawks versus Broncos, and what the Seahawks Legion of Boom defense was able to do against Peyton Manning, and you know, he was still really throwing it downfield as much as he wanted, where he wanted, and whatnot. Just had a phenomenal year with the Broncos, and the Seahawks just said, "Not today, son. You're in our house." And even though that wasn't really in Seattle, because they were playing in the only cold weather outdoor Super Bowl in Super Bowl history, and that was in Giant Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. But the Seahawks just put a pounding on Peyton Manning, and unlike a Super Bowl I've ever seen before, where one team just gets out to a huge lead and the other team takes forever to score their first points.
Well, that brings me to my number 1. My number 1 Super Bowl of all time. I don't even know how you argue it at this point. You're down 28-3, and you come back and win the Super Bowl 34-28 in overtime. Of course, I'm talking about Super Bowl 51, the Patriots and Falcons Super Bowl. I remember just going crazy, you know, rubbing it in people's faces and just, I remember me and Jim sitting on the couch and Ryan just laughing and talking about, this is great. You know, finally the Patriot dynasty's dead. Tom Brady can just eat it. This is fantastic. And then all of a sudden they get a touchdown and you're like, well, they weren't going to hold them down forever. You know, fine, whatever. Then they get a turnover. Actually, they get another touchdown. And you're like, okay, and a 2-point conversion to make it 28-18. And you're like, okay, here they come, whatever. Then they get the fumble and they recover it. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, okay, Atlanta, what are you doing? Then they scored, right? And that made it, you know, I don't even remember the score at that point. But they basically brought it to one touchdown. And you're like, okay, Atlanta, let's go, Atlanta, right? And then they finally go up the field. They have a great play by Julio Jones. They're in field goal range. All they need to do, like Seattle, is run the ball. No, they throw it. Holding penalty. They throw it again. incomplete. They throw it again, sack out of field goal range. Punt. Here comes Tom Brady. Bing, bing, bing. Most unbelievable catch in Super Bowl history. At least right up there with David Tyree's catch and Lynn Swann's unbelievable catch in Super Bowl X. And you're like, oh my God. And then here come the Patriots, and they score the touchdown to force overtime, and they get the 2-point conversion. And then in overtime, they take the ball, they go right up the field, and they score, and you're just sitting there going, what just happened? How did this just happen? Patriot fans, rightfully so, are losing their minds. And Tom Brady completes, in my opinion, it may not be the greatest comeback from the standpoint of the farthest from behind, but it is the greatest comeback in professional football history. It's not even close because of the magnitude of the game, how poorly the Patriots were playing, and how bad the Falcons were whooping them. And Atlanta was an offensive juggernaut. It blows my mind, that game. There's so many things about that game. It is the greatest game I've ever seen, bar none, in the history of the Super Bowl.
Well, great minds think alike, Anthony, because that is my number one Super Bowl as well.
Yeah.
And Super Bowl 51 was ridiculous. I've started to not get too excited unless my team is in the Super Bowl, which has only happened twice in my life. And with the Falcons going out to 28-3, you're sitting back and you're like, okay, maybe this Falcons team is legit. I mean, Matt Ryan was just named MVP, and that Julio Jones catch on the sideline was insane. But then the tide starts turning, and the Patriots start coming back. And one play in particular really helped the Patriots score, get back in the game, and eventually get it to overtime. And that was a Julian Edelman catch. And then he has come up big for a lot of Patriots games in the past, and this was no different. There was a tip bounce ball or something like that he barely got into his hands before, it didn't even hit the carpet. And they looked at 1,000 different replays and still couldn't tell, and they left it as a catch. But also, people are starting to forget. A lot of people for the AFC Championship game was like, "Oh, it's so unfair that Patrick Mahomes didn't get a chance to hit the ball in overtime to see what he could do." Well, Patriots Falcons was also the first Super Bowl to go into overtime. Okay, and what did the Patriots do? They won the toss. They went 8 plays, 75 yards, capped off by a Jay White 2-yard touchdown run. And you didn't hear anybody saying, "Oh, well, Matt Ryan should have had an opportunity." Well, they could have also stopped the Patriots too. But it was just a fantastic game. A partial of this game won me money in my office pool. So of course, made me happy because they covered the spread, or they covered the spread in the game. So yeah, Patriots. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, there's really no other Super Bowl unless the team comes back from 30 down. There's no other team there's no other Super Bowl that's really going to overtake this. I don't think anytime soon either.
I'm trying to remember too if this was a Super Bowl where I picked Atlanta. I remember thinking Atlanta could win, but I also remember saying that because that year the Patriots were like 13-3, 14-2. They didn't have a lot of weaknesses, and you knew. You know what? I did pick New England because I remember saying the Rams had a better offense in 2001 than the Falcons have this year, and they had no answer. I don't see, a defensive-minded head coach having offensive answers to Bill Belichick's defense, and that's why I picked Atlanta. All right, Eric. That's it. Top 10 Super Bowls of all time. Coming up next, top 10 intriguing Super Bowls of all time.